No, I'm like mic'd up. Alrighty. We good level-wise? All right. This is a talk about change. It's about the rainbow of death model and how it explains how my fellow instigators and I managed to cross the chasm between us and the majority of Googlers to make automated testing a standard development practice. I'm hoping it'll inspire you to break from the standard narrative and overcome your own cultural challenges. But first, allow me to share the story of how I earned the privilege to speak to you today. From the very beginning, I've always felt compelled to push boundaries, to assert my own truth. Whenever others would suggest that I follow a traditional path, I would tilt in a completely different direction. The standard narrative never applied to me. Eventually, however, my lack of musical commitment or talent gave way to the creative euphoria of programming. My first job after college, my colleagues poked fun at me for carrying my library of programming and algorithm books with me day in, day out. And then my team went through a death march, a crushing experience of working insane hours to deliver on impossible requirements by an impossible deadline on a fragile, untested code base that barely worked to begin with. The pressure was intense, and I was not my best self at this time. But somehow we did it. We met the spec by the deadline, and then we were given the runway to do whatever we could to make the damn thing faster. So in this period of relative calm and freedom, I discovered unit testing, completely by accident from an article I read in the C and C++ Users Journal. So with my library and my newfound testing practice in hand, I began rewriting an entire subsystem from the ground up. I would apply a design principle or an algorithm, and I'd exercise it with focused, fast, thorough tests every step of the way rather than waiting for system integration. I could immediately validate that each part worked as planned and spend more time developing than debugging. And in the end, my new subsystem improved performance by a factor of 18 and saved the project. And when a bug or two cropped up, I could investigate, reproduce, fix, validate, and ship a new version the same day, not the next week or the next month. My teammates recognized my abilities, but they never adopted my practices despite their obvious impact, and I couldn't figure out why, so I put my house on the market, I quit my job, I met a woman on an online dating site whose referral led to me joining Google in 2005, in that order. So Google already had smart people, knowledge-sharing culture, unimaginable compute power, and great food. It was flush with cash and positive press, and at the time, it appeared to have zero of the typical organizational bullshit. It served the people, and the people served the mission. With all that freedom and food came a great deal of responsibility, not just to our users and our customers, but also to one another. There were standard practices already built into the culture such that everyone was expected to conform to common style idioms, to submit code for review and to review others' code, to disseminate knowledge through talks and documentation, and to generally collaborate with and support one another. All of this kept silos from forming and enabled the company and its developers to expand their capabilities rapidly and move very quickly. We had the responsibility to help one another improve our code, our products, our company, and ourselves. Yet, even though Google was doing so many things right, very few developers wrote tests. Why is that? Well, unit testing wasn't part of the MIT or Stanford PhD curriculum. Most had never experienced a death march. Relatively few had been exposed to automated testing concepts, techniques, or tools, or had any experience in informing them of their value. On top of that, the company appeared to be capable of doing little wrong at the time, as its stock price and hiring rate showed no signs of slowing down. How could one claim that a lack of testing was hurting it? It was impossible to prove this objectively, yet the core of Google's priority structure was founded on data-driven decision-making. And this structure has served Google very well by all accounts, including my own, but it made it extremely difficult to convince people that an investment in automated testing would pay dividends. Even so, some of us felt that the company was at risk of collapsing under its own success. The size and complexity of its code and products exploded with its growth. Even though Google tried to hire the best and provide a supportive environment, the development operation was getting so big it was beginning to break down. No project was a better example of this than the Google Web Server, or GWS for short, the program running the google.com homepage. I didn't work on the GWS team, but I was close with many of its members. And in 2004, GWS was not a glamorous assignment. It was a dumping ground for lots of unrelated changes as search features were developed by different teams. So imagine if you break google.com or allow it to be broken. Search results could be bad or unacceptably slow to return, and thousands of queries per second turn to thousands of unfulfilled promises. The business loses not only revenue, but trust. When Bart Metarata became tech lead of the GWS team, he believed automated testing would go a long ways towards curing the ills of complexity and fragility. So the team took a hard line. No more changes would go and be accepted into GWS without accompanying tests. They set up a continuous build and religiously kept it passing and monitored their test coverage to make sure it went up over time. They wrote a policy and testing guides and insisted that contributors both inside and outside the team followed them. Despite the initial unpopularity of this policy, the GWS team held firm and eventually turned a corner. They became one of the most productive teams in the company, integrating a large number of changes from different teams while maintaining a brisk release schedule. New team members could make productive contributions to this complex system quickly thanks to good code coverage, test coverage, and code health. Ultimately, this radical policy enabled the google.com homepage to expand its capabilities rapidly and to thrive in an amazingly fast-moving technology landscape. GWS was a model of automated testing effectiveness, but it was still a relatively small team in a large and growing company. Given all the other forces, worldviews, and personalities at Google, and our inability to prove the value of testing using data, the GWS message was getting drowned out by the Google standard narrative. We had to find ways to amplify the GWS message and to build a bridge across the chasm. The chasm model comes from Jeffrey A. Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, and it describes how different people adopt change differently, and each class has an important role to play in the change process. The innovators and the early adopters are the like-minded seekers that I call instigators. They're the catalyst for change, but their unfiltered barrage of new ideas can be upsetting and costly to the organization. The early majority is open to change, but they need accessible tools and procedures. They're the fad filter. They're the sympathetic audience that can give us the direct, constructive feedback we need to polish and scale the most worthwhile ideas. The late majority is a stabilizing force. They're the repository of institutional knowledge that slowly absorbs the tools and practices that are proven to best serve the organization. They're not as open to change as the early majority, but they're happy to accept proven practices. The laggards challenge the instigators most directly, questioning or outright denying the value of a new idea, and they provide the most vocal and active resistance. However, their direct criticism may inspire the instigators to find unexpected common ground and more effective solutions than they otherwise might. Getting the messaging to the right people in the right order is key, and it's crossing the chasm between the instigators and the early majority that will make or break an initiative. And what I've added to this model across the chasm is the titular rainbow of death. I borrowed this model from fellow ex-Googler Albert Wong, but funny name was my idea. And it delineates the steps necessary to carry an initiative from one side of the chasm to the other. Intervene. The instigators, with the necessary expertise, write tools and resolve critical issues themselves. Validate. The instigators give the early majority a means of visualizing and marking progress to demonstrate value and encourage further progress. Inform. The instigators teach the early majority how to do the right thing the right way. Inspire. The instigators articulate a vision and compel the early majority to act on it. Mentor. The instigators cultivate relationships with the early majority, providing insight and moral support, coaching them to acquire new habits. Finally, empower. After the instigators have provided the knowledge and the power necessary to make the right thing the easy thing, the early majority exercises their new capability without guidance. They have become experts themselves. The progression of concepts demonstrates the theoretical transition from dependency on experts towards empowerment, but it's not a hard ordering requirement. Parts of the rainbow can be developed in parallel using the resources at hand. And over time, we can look back and see where more work is needed and fill in the remaining ones. Even if our efforts seem scattered, random, and disconnected at first, we can begin to understand how they actually reinforce one another. By the way, if you're already getting hung up on the word death in the title, hang on till the end of the ride here. All will be revealed. It's the responsibility of the instigators to build this bridge across the chasm. And despite the challenges we faced, we testing instigators still had a lot of advantages by virtue of being at Google. We had access to information and tools to facilitate its discovery. We were empowered to develop and promote a vision, and we had the freedom to join forces with other like-minded folks to pursue a common goal. Shortly before I joined Google in 2005, Bart joined forces with Nick Lasecki to form the testing grouplet. Grouplets were teams of volunteers pulling their 20% time from the famous policy where Googlers are free to work on outside projects to address an issue affecting the entire company. I eventually succeeded Bart and Nick as one of the co-leads of the grouplet, and we had very little budget and zero authority, but we had the freedom to explore creative solutions to the problems facing automated testing adoption, often relying on the GWIS experience as a model. And to better frame the change process and the challenges we face, let's apply Kurt Lewin's theory of social change. It consists of the unfreezing phase, in which existing behaviors must be unlearned, the changing phase, in which new behaviors are learned, and the refreezing phase, in which the new behaviors become standard procedure. It also describes driving forces that compel change and restraining forces that work against it. Google developers were growing ever more frozen in an unsustainable pattern, and we believe automated testing was necessary to break that pattern. At the same time, there was an array of restraining forces pushing against its adoption. People mostly had no experience with automated testing outside of the slowness and brittleness of the status quo, and they were under constant delivery pressure while feeling intimidated by many of their peers. How could you blame people for not testing when they didn't have the time to learn? Economists call this temporal discounting. Basically, if you give someone the option to push a feature now without tests, or to prevent a problem which may or may not happen through an investment in testing, most of the time they'll ship and hope for the best. Sorry, going a little quick here. Combined with the fact that the ever-slowing tools made it impossible to reach a state of flow, this combination of immediate pain and slow feedback in pursuit of a distant, uncertain benefit made the right thing way harder than it needed to be. Arguing against these excuses would have been counterproductive. They signified real problems we needed to solve, and the standard narrative from which they emerged would not provide their solutions. So we began experimenting with a lot of different ideas to start chipping away at these problems, starting with the resources we already had at hand. We worked closely with ENG-EDU, our in-house training organization, to develop training materials called Code Labs, and to develop new hire or Noogler lecture and lab sessions based on these Code Labs. We worked with them on holding tech talks, often with book giveaways. We introduced the small, medium, large test size schema to dispense with the existing unit and regression test terminology, which at the time meant runs in less than 5 minutes or runs longer than 5 minutes. And if you know anything about unit testing, you realize how hilarious that is. And to define more rigorously the different types of tests and what they were good for. Finally, we worked closely with the tools teams to reduce the friction of slow tools that amplify the "I don't have time to test" excuse. So we can see how these pieces began to fill in the rainbow. And notice the early emphasis on inform. The natural first inclination is to drop knowledge into people's hands and hope it results in widespread adoption. But, as we've learned time and again, information and facts alone aren't always sufficient to change people's worldviews and behaviors. Still, these activities helped the grouplet itself converge upon concepts and terminology that helped us deliver our message moving forward. In early 2006, during a brainstorming session to set quarterly goals, we literally asked ourselves, how can we take all this good information we've been pumping into the ecosystem, make it actually stick with people? After bouncing around ideas to the point of silliness, and unbeknownst to us at the time, we hit upon possibly our greatest breakthrough, testing on the toilet. Our weekly testing periodical that is still published to this day. By publishing an episode each week in nearly every bathroom in the company worldwide, we were able to gradually raise the level of testing knowledge and sophistication throughout the company. People would take tools and techniques they learned about in their spare time and apply it to their production code. Eventually, TOTT episodes became like the official style guides, references to justify approaches or to support comments made during code reviews. We also recognized that many teams were interested in testing, but they needed a few hints. So we developed the Test Certified program, a roadmap based on the GWIS model that, that was designed to hack the measurement-focused priorities of the culture by providing measurable tasks and levels and a ladder of teams, and to overcome the first scary obstacle of not knowing where to start. And we also provided volunteer mentors to each team that would provide advice and that would ultimately validate their progress in climbing the TC ladder. Eventually, some larger projects with big visible products got interested in Test Certified, but they needed more assistance than a TC mentor could provide. So we pitched an idea to the executives, got approval and funding, and launched the Test Mercenaries, a team of full-time internal consultants hired to help teams improve their testing practices by applying the testing grouplets, tools, and techniques to that team's own code, using Test Certified both as a guide and a goal. And the Mercs also worked closely with the tools teams to provide a steady stream of feedback that drove innovation as we applied new tools to challenging projects. So we can see more of the rainbow coming together now. Test Certified served to inform and inspire as well as mentor, but its validation function was the most critical. Teams could take concrete steps toward making a tangible impact on their code quality and productivity. We sweetened the deal by providing participating teams with build orbs, glowing information radiators that provided a conspicuous visual indication of the state of a team's build. And hacking on these orbs in their driver software was a source of fun and inspiration for the grouplet members as well. We also began taking part in the proud Google tradition of organizing fix-its, where volunteers would organize these one-day events to address important but not urgent issues. These were neither approved or mandated by the executive hierarchy, but executives often gladly encouraged participation. And as it turned out, writing tests, fixing broken tests, or climbing the TC ladder were perfect fix-it tasks. And the urgency of fix-its generated a critical mass of effort, both from volunteers and participants, that ratcheted up testing awareness to a new plateau each time. So, after 2 years, we were really starting to roll and to drift apart. The grouplet, the Test Certified program, testing on the toilet, and the Test Mercenaries were all robust, independent entities. I felt like I was the sole common thread between them. So I prodded folks to articulate a unifying vision. Eventually, we hit upon the right one, getting every team in the company to Test Certified Level 3, whether they were enrolled in the program or not. This not only aligned our efforts, it also enabled the perfect partnership with our testing staff. It provided them with a framework they could use to encourage their dev teams to do some testing and catch bugs up front so the testers could provide higher value quality feedback. And if I may be petty for a moment, I personally sold this to the testers in 2007 before a certain author had joined the company. But anyways, note that Empower is still a bit light. The tooling innovations weren't yet in wide use, limiting the impact of our shared knowledge. We needed a way to drive tool adoption company-wide rapidly as well. And eventually we realized fix-its were an incredibly powerful means of doing this. The Revolution fix-it in January 2008 made the first huge dent in the I don't have time to test problem by rolling out our new cloud-based build infrastructure, as well as Blaze, which has recently been open sourced as Bazel, the GNU Make replacement that took advantage of this new infrastructure. And the primary cost teams had to pay to adopt these new tools was to clean up their dependencies and make sure all their build inputs were version controlled. A cost teams were all too glad to pay for faster builds. And coincidentally, Fixing these problems and adopting faster tools made it much easier to try automated testing. Not everyone participated in the revolution, but everyone was impacted by it. For weeks afterwards, teams would talk about revolutionizing their builds. And then that September, the financial crisis indirectly demonstrated the impact of the testing grouplet. We weren't the sole reason Google survived the crisis, but when the company let go most of its contractors, including most manual testers and most of the test mercenaries, there wasn't a quality crisis or a development velocity slowdown. People, for the most part, knew what the right thing to do was and had the power to do it. The right thing had become easy enough. So after 3.5 years of saturating the culture, we finally had the support and momentum we needed to finish building the rainbow across the chasm a 1.5 years later. The test automation platform, launched during the TAP Fix-It in March 2010, was a continuous integration system built upon the revolutionized tools that could test every change and clearly indicate the source of a breakage, often so fast that most breakages were reported and fixed before most people noticed. After 5 years of breaking from the standard narrative, with success uncertain for most of it, we succeeded in making automated testing an indispensable part of the Google development culture. So, what was the observable impact 5 years after that? Rachel Potfin's at-scale presentation from 2015, Why Google Stores Billions of Lines of Code in a Single Repository, contains some astonishing figures, which, as of now, are 2 years out of date. And while she enumerates a host of other tools that comprise this ecosystem, she makes a point of saying specifically, TAP is our automated testing infrastructure without which this model would completely fall apart. The reason I keep telling this story is to try to humanize this aspect of Google and to make it accessible, provide insight into the strengths, weaknesses, and flaws of the humans that comprised it. In understanding and empathizing with these characters and their struggles, we can better see how our own thoughts and behaviors influence the course of events. And we can draw from these examples the courage we need to stand up in the arena for ourselves and to help make a better future. Even so, some of you may look at me and only see the scarlet G, the mark of the outsider whose experiences are unique and unusual and either don't apply to your standard narrative or threaten it. Google's special, you might say. They have smarter, younger people who are willing to take more risks. Well, haven't you heard what I've been telling you? Google is a human organization like any other. It got some things right that many organizations don't, but still comprised of humans. Some of whom are open-minded and brilliant, to be sure, but some who were or are ignorant, overconfident, arrogant, and insecure to a fault. There are a lot of developers straight out of school, but also a lot of people that spent a decade or more in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. And remember, it took 5 years before most of these smart, risk-taking people got on the bus, and there were only a handful of us behind the wheel from start to finish. Or you might say, Googlers think they're so smart that the way Google did things is the way things are supposed to be done everywhere. Well, it's true. We picked up a lot of exciting ideas from our amazing experiences as Googlers. But are we supposed to forget those ideas and experiences when we leave to join another organization? Is it true they won't work in another environment? There's no guarantee that what worked to drive automated testing adoption at Google will work for transforming your organization, but maybe some variation or combination of these ideas are worth a try. And remember, it took 2 years of experimentation before we understood the problem well enough that we were able to articulate a mission and a strategy. We didn't have the clear vision and specific plan figured out when we began, and we likely never would have if we were waiting for both to snap into place before doing anything. But this talk isn't about the flyers we put in the bathrooms, or the certification program we developed, or the tools we wrote and rolled out in big fun events. The tool I'm offering here is this framework, the rainbow of death, for examining why these things worked. Tool to help you develop empathy for the fears and challenges your colleagues face so that you can discover the right solutions for your environment. A tool to break free from the standard narrative that's holding you back. I want you to write your own narrative. I don't want you to just You passively listen to mine and conveniently conclude that my friends and I were just lucky to get hired by Google. We enjoyed some advantages, but we worked our asses off for 5 years when many of the forces of the company's culture were working against us. And those numbers of Rachels wouldn't exist if we didn't spend 5 years breaking from the standard narrative instead of just waiting to be told what to do or waving our fingers in people's faces and calling them stupid or dangerous. While the technological advances were critically important to making the right thing the easy thing, the greater challenge was to create the cultural space necessary for lasting change. We had to be patient with ourselves to work out the nuances of the problem and patient with our colleagues to adopt our practices once the pieces were in place. Believe me, most days during those 5 years, whenever I'd see someone send a change out for review and it didn't have any tests and the reviewer approved it without asking for any, I'd want to go shout in their faces, like, don't you know how irresponsible you're being? Stop being so careless and overconfident. Don't you know how much you're hurting your company? I think it's pretty obvious to most of us that such an approach isn't likely to persuade others to consider a different viewpoint. No one will adopt new practices, with the same open mind or the same degree of resistance, with the same educational background or life experiences, in short, with the same worldview. Everybody feels like their mind is the right balance of open and closed, whether they always seek the truth to question and reaffirm it, or never do. And as instigators, it's our responsibility to accept this truth and work with it. For example, today, I have the privilege of standing before you and of deciding the path and presentation of this narrative. I'm striving to inspire you, the audience, to go forth with these ideas and make change happen. But for each of you, this is very personal. Your focus is on the effect my words are having on your thoughts and your perceptions. You have your own reasons for why some of what I say resonates and other things don't. Some things that you may think are brilliant, the people who, back at the office, you think most need to hear it might hear it and think I'm peddling horse shit at best or snake oil at worst, or they might just sit back and think, cool story, bro, but that won't work on my special snowflake project because of superficial reason X, Y, and or Z. Or maybe it does resonate, and they don't feel like they have the knowledge, the power, the freedom, or the safety to act on it. And to a vocal and tenacious minority, we shall always remain the opposition party. We can do little to fight it and little to gain in doing so. We must succeed in spite of it. We can't rely solely on metrics and logical argument to change minds. Metrics can mark progress and validate improvement, and our logic must be as sound as possible while asserting our case, but they are far from sufficient to inspire action in either the skeptical or the powerless. Metrics and arguments don't change most minds. Experiences do. And the key to creating the necessary experiences is to discover the true pain and address it. Don't get caught up in whether or not people have the right to feel or complain about such pain, whether they're stupid or entitled. It's not your job to judge the people or the pain. It's your job to understand it and to make it go away. The problem you want to solve may not be the problem that you have to solve first. And this won't feel natural. It won't feel right. It'll feel contrary to every instinct that you have to meet opposition and resistance with the greater opposite and greater force. It's easier to attack than to engage because this is the standard narrative. And the most important thing to remember about the standard narrative is that's the very thing that created the situation that we hope to change. It's comprised of the motions we go through to perform business as usual with an incomplete or incorrect, mistaken understanding of the downstream consequences. How can we change other people's worldviews? We're incapable of changing our own. And this is where the word death comes into play. Specifically, the death of our own ideas, our own ego. If we cling to these from the fear that our grasp on reality will slip and the world will fall apart, there's little hope that our rainbow will take shape to carry us across that chasm and connect with the others and to heal the pain. The rainbow of death can help you approach your own problems with clarity and courage, with an open heart as well as an open mind. As you shape plans to break from the standard narrative that are the best fit for your culture and capabilities. I find Caravaggio's David with the Head of Goliath compelling because it's a self-portrait of the artist as Goliath. And where some may find this image and its theme jarringly morbid, I see an inspirational breakthrough moment of self-awareness. As Caravaggio discovered after a lifetime of battling his own demons, we in the testing grouplet discovered that the greatest force resisting us wasn't external. The real opposition we faced was the company's own conditioned instincts, our own identity, our own culture. Often the greatest obstacle to the change we want to see in the world is the way we as individuals, organizations, and society at large continue to see the world. So now I put the question to you. What is the pain that the people around you feel? Where's it really coming from? How can you provide the knowledge and the power necessary to relieve that pain? What resources do you have available? What fellow instigators are waiting from all corners to join you in crossing the chasm? What can you do to intervene, validate, inform, inspire, mentor, and ultimately empower your people? And how much longer can you afford to wait before taking action? Will you decide to follow the standard narrative or to choose your own? Thank you. And for those following along at home, if you couldn't see the slides, go to mike-bland.com/b-rainbow-of-death. Thank you, guys. And gals.
Thanks, Mike.